What's up, everyone? How you doing? Hope you're doing well. Today I'm going to be bringing you another season preview and prediction. We're going to be doing the Detroit Pistons, so without further ado, let's get into it. Looking at their 2019-20 recap, there's not much to look at. They weren't very good, one of the worst teams in the East and in the league in general. So they ended up trading their star center, DeAndre Drummond, who's been with the franchise since they drafted him. I forget when he went there, but he was with that team for a while. And they got almost no return for him. That was a big conversation throughout the season. People were like, Drummond has no trade value, and they're going to have to pay him another max contract at the end of the season, because obviously he's going to accept that because he's not going to get that anywhere. Like, he had a player option at the end of the 2019-20 season. So they traded him to the Cleveland Cavaliers for 2 second-round picks. And as much as this player lost his value, that's still not a good return. It just was an unfortunate situation for them, where no matter what, they were losing that trade, or just losing an asset for basically nothing. So very tough situation for them. And then this offseason, and we'll get to that later more so, but they let Christian Wood sign with the Houston Rockets, which was mind-boggling to me. But anyway, let's get into some moves they made. They traded for DeLon Wright from the Dallas Mavericks. And, he was okay for the Mavericks. He was just kind of like a good, steady backup point guard. He was injured for a bit, and I think Jalen Brunson kind of ended up taking over his minutes. But I think he'll be a solid point guard, backup starter. I don't know if they're going to start Derrick Rose or him, but he's just like a good veteran presence point guard. There's not much to say about him. Just pretty good at all the things on the court. The only thing is he's pretty big, so he can actually maybe be a small forward in some 3-guard lineups, but that's about it. And then their draft picks, they drafted a few players, but I'm just going to talk about Killian Hayes, because that's the only player I've looked at film for. And he's, he just scares me because he has two things that really don't, he was, back in the European league that he was in, he was able to get by on just, understanding the game pretty well and just, understanding angles. But he lacks two very important things I feel like you need in this league: a good handle and a good first step. You don't have to be athletic, but you at least need to be able to have a quick first step. Luka isn't athletic, but he's able to get defenders on that first step and then play with angles from there. Killian Hayes is neither that. Really, limited handle. Really is only good at dribbling on his left side. Just not good at dribbling on his right side at all, and that limits him when trying to get around defenders. And then his speed is he's so slow. Honestly, he's just a slow guy. He plays at a slow pace, which is fine, like I said, but you need to be able to have a quick first step in order to get by defenders and get them on your back and play with angles like I know he can do. Defensively, he's pretty good so far, but offensively, he's not good at all. He's shooting very poorly from the field, very poorly from three, not scoring the ball well, not being a great facilitator either. I'm not ready to give up with this player. Obviously, he's 20, but it hasn't shown many signs yet of being a franchise point guard for them. So then free agents they signed, Wayne Ellington from the New York Knicks. He got signed on a minimum, and basically he's a three-point shooter. That's it. Not really good at much else. Very off-ball player, doesn't really dribble much, not that great defensively. He's really not that great of a three-point shooter anymore. I mean, he's still good, don't get me wrong, but he shoots league average on 4 attempts a game this year, and last year, I think he did shoot 35% on 4 attempts, and he's carrying that over this year. He had that one really good year for the Heat where he shot 7 attempts on 39%, but besides that, he's been pretty average from 3, but the contract isn't terrible, so it's whatever. He's just a 3-point shooter for them. Jamal Grant from the Denver Nuggets, and this one I have some issue with. He's obviously doing pretty well this season. He's averaging 23 points a game. And I know people will look at that and be like, oh, he's only getting paid $19 million and he's a 20-point-per-game scorer. And that's true, but if Jeremiah Grant is your number one scorer and you're really relying on him to be your number one option, that team's not going to be good. And the team isn't good. That team is lost. I think they're 1-4, 1-5. They're not good. And I don't think they're going to be good this year. And I think he's just benefiting from being on a bad team. He's just the only guy who is shooting. He's shooting a lot on a bad team. He's getting a lot of opportunities because he's on a bad team. And I know this is what he wanted. He got the exact same contract from Denver, but decided to take it from the Pistons because he wants more opportunity. He wants to be able to average 20 points a game, which if that's what he wants to do, good for him. But I don't think he could be a number one on a winning team or even close to that. Like, I don't think you can rely on him to be your 2 or 3 on a winning team, really. I think he's a really good role player, like a star role player, but I don't see him as like any sort of offensive piece for a team. Like, if you're actually relying on him to give you a certain amount of points every game, I just don't think he can do that. So then Mason Plumley, another player who's from the Denver Nuggets who they signed. And this one I have issue with, but not for the same reason. Like, his contract isn't bad. He's making $8 million a year. I think Mason Plumlee's worth that, but we'll get into it later. But they could have re-signed Christian Wood with that money, but they decided not to. And I like Miles Plumlee to an extent. He's like a good starting center. He does a little too much on offense. Like, he tries to be like, he has the ability to facilitate, but he just tries to make like really aggressive passes, and he tries to go like off the dribble a lot. Like, it's kind of funny. I've seen the Pistons clear out to let him isolate at least 3 times this season. So he's definitely pretty skilled for his size, but sometimes he goes outside of himself and thinks he's more skilled than he actually is. But I mean, as long as he can play decent center minutes for them, $8 million is nothing that's going to kill them in the long run. And then another player they signed, Josh Jackson from the Memphis Grizzlies, who was drafted 4th overall in the Markelle Fultz Lonzo draft. And he's been pretty disappointing, but he's had like good stretches. Like, it's people call it the Josh Jackson effect, or Rusty Buckets calls it that, where at the end of the season, when teams aren't playing their star players for the playoffs, or bad teams are just giving up so they can get a higher draft pick, Josh Jackson always ends up playing better. But I mean, this year his splits aren't bad. He averaged like 9 points on pretty good efficiency. So if he could just be a decent defender and then like a athletic finisher and decent open 3-point shooter, I think he's useful. I think he could be a rotation small forward. So I think he could be okay for them. And then let's get into who's leaving them. And this is kind of the part I get deep into. Christian Wood, who signed with the Houston Rockets for $13 million a year. I think it goes up to 14, but it's not a lot. And this just makes no sense to me. I just don't get it. They traded Andre Drummond last year, and I feel like part of it was to see what they had in Christian Wood. And Christian Wood showed that he could be a offensive focal point if given the opportunity. He's always been one of those guys where it's like, once given the opportunity, he plays really well, but he doesn't get a lot of opportunity. He was given the opportunity. He averaged 20 and 10 on really good efficiency, and they decided to let him walk in free agency. And I looked into it because I just was shocked by it. And supposedly, like, there was a lot of confusion about what they were doing this offseason, and whatever. The only thing people could like muster from it is that they wanted to go defensive because Christian Wood isn't that great of a defensive player. But I just don't see why. Like, they wanted to get younger and defensive, I guess, but they didn't really get younger. They signed a lot of veterans, and they kept the young players like Sekou Demboyo, who we'll get to, and they let players like Luke Kennard and Christian Wood walk, who are actually good young players offensively. And I don't get it. Like, you actually had a really good player who you could sign on a really good contract. Like, he's a borderline all-star, and you're paying him $14 million a year. That's 100% worth it. And you had it. You showed it. He showed it for you. Like, at the end of the season, you let him play, and you showed, hey, I could be a number 1 option, and you don't have to pay me that much. And then they were like, nah, we're good. We don't want you. We'll sign Mason Plumlee with that money. Like, I just don't understand it at all. It's just mind-boggling to me. It's like you had a young asset, and you just decided you don't want it. I don't know. And they didn't get a lot in the Houston sign and trade. I think they got like a trade exception. And it's like, even if you don't love the player, sign him, keep the asset so you can trade him. You could trade him, and a lot of teams would have taken a guy for $14 million, averaging 20 and 10 a night on good efficiency. Like, I don't think that's a stretch to say you could have gotten a first-round pick or 2 for that on that contract, his age, what he's averaging. I don't understand it. It boggles my mind, honestly. So yeah, let's move on. Luke Kennard, another one that kind of confused me. They got Siddique Bay with this trade. It was like a 4-team or 3-team trade with the Nets, and one other team that I can't remember now. But Yeah, they ended up giving Clippers. Yeah, they ended up moving Luke Kennard to the Clippers. They got the 19th overall pick and picked Siddique Bay, which I don't hate. Like, this one is way more understandable, just because you were gonna have to pay Kennard and maybe you just didn't love who he was. But yeah, it's weird because you got rid of one of your better young players, and it's just weird because both of these players, like Kennard and Christian Wood, it's not like they costed a ton, and it's like these were your young players that you were grooming. And then it's like, nah, we don't want you now that you're pretty good. Let's go somewhere else. And I understand, like, you want more young assets, but at some point, those young pieces are going to have to turn into real pieces. And those were the young players that turned into real pieces. And now you just have more young players who aren't real pieces. You have Siddique Bay, who I think can be good, but he's not yet. So you're still hoping that he becomes good. You have Sekou Demboyo, who is a project of projects. Like, he's just raw as hell. And he's just like, you don't have any tangible like players yet. You don't have anything that you could say moving forward, this is a young asset we could trade him, we could be a good team around him, we could build around him. You have none of that now. And at least with Christian Wood and Luke Kennard, you had something. Like, you had some young talent that you could build around. So I don't know, I just don't get it. And then they let Langston Galloway sign with the Phoenix Suns, which that doesn't really matter. He was a really good veteran for them, and I really like Langston Galloway on the Suns. I feel like this is a rare one where him leaving is actually a good thing. I just love guys like him who you can play 5 minutes a game and he doesn't care, or if he's hitting his shots, you can play 25 minutes a game and he's going to be really good for you. He's just a really good guy to have in your rotation, and he's a veteran, so good locker room guy for the Suns. So yeah, moving on to who's on this roster. They only have 4 guys on this roster. I'm only going to talk about 3, and I mean 4 people who stayed from 2019-20 to 2020-2021. One of them, Siddique Bay, or not Siddique Bay, so I keep saying that, Sekou Demboyo. And like I said, he's just very raw. There's not much to project about him or even talk about. He's athletic. He's a good size, so he's switchable on defense. He has an okay three-point shot. It hasn't been consistent yet, but like if he continues to work at it, it could become consistent. But yeah, he's just a project. He's just a raw basketball player that you're going to have to develop. And I understand, like, maybe they just wanted to develop these guys instead of have winning expectations with Wood and Kennard, but I just feel like you could have kept them. I just don't see why you get rid of assets for no reason. It just, I don't know. It just doesn't seem logical to me what they did. But yeah, Siddique Bay could be something in the future if they develop him, and I guess that's their plan. So hopefully it works out for them. So let's talk about these 2 guys who I think they should trade. Blake Griffin is one of them. The stats you're going to see is from 2019-20, which he was injured and he missed some games, so it looks really bad. He's doing a lot better this year, and while I think the player that he was is gone, like, he's not going to be an all-star anymore, I think he could still be a really useful player for a lot of teams because he's just really smart, still pretty athletic, so he could be a lob threat, pretty switchable defensively, can shoot the ball pretty well, like open threes. I feel like he's going to make open threes. He's shooting like 39% this year. And yeah, he's just skilled. He can pass, he can dribble, like, he can actually be a facilitator for you. I just think he'll be a really nice, like, 4th option on a team, just like kind of a glue guy to get like things going offensively. He could still set screens, and I love guys who can pass and set screens. You could do a lot of handoff stuff with that. So yeah, he's just super skilled now. Like, the athleticism isn't there anymore, but he's just a super skilled power forward / center. So defensively, if he plays center, it might not be great sometimes, but I think as long as he is on a team who is a winner, like a contender, I think he could be really good. So I would look to trade him. I know the contract is tough, so there's not many suitors for him, but I definitely think you could trade him for something. And then the player I think they should really trade, Derrick Rose. I think there's a lot of teams that could use what he does. He's a high teens scorer, pretty efficient, is willing to come off the bench as we've seen, and he's on a really good contract, $7 million a year. I would look for a team like Utah, maybe. I know it's tough because they have Mike Conley, but if there's a way they could get off that money, maybe even trade that to the Pistons, give them some draft picks, get a better player, I feel like, and Derrick Rose. There's a few other teams, but that's just the one that comes to mind. So yeah, I think Derrick Rose could be a good trade piece for some teams. He still has value as a scorer and a facilitator sometimes, but yeah, just teams who need scoring from a point guard, like a veteran point guard who you know can get you at least like 16 to 18 points a game. I think he's really good for that, and he's on a really cheap deal. So I could see him getting moved, and I know you can get something back for him. Like you can get a first round pick probably back for Derrick Rose. So yeah, projecting this team, I don't know. I just don't see their plan. Like I think that's kind of what a lot of people are saying. Like this offseason was just confusing. It didn't seem like they got younger necessarily because they signed guys like Mason Plumley, Jamal Grant, Wayne Ellington. Like they made signings that are win now, and then they also got rid of win now players like Christian Wood and Luke Kennard and said, no, we want to develop our young guys and develop through the draft or rebuild through the draft. And it's like, so pick a side. Like it reminds me of the Knicks last year where it's just like you had cap space, so you used it, but why? Like, I don't know. It's just like a perfect parallel. I feel like Jamal Grant averaging 23 points a game this year. He's still a good player, but if you trade him to another team, he's not going to be that same guy. What was Marcus Morris for them? Marcus Morris averaged 20 points a game for the Knicks last season, got traded to the Clippers, turned into a 13-point guy, off ball, just shooting threes, back to what he was. Just because you're on a bad team and you're averaging 20 points doesn't mean you're like now that caliber of player. And I just feel like, I don't know, they just made a lot of confusing moves, and it isn't really clear what they're doing. It doesn't really make sense, and I just don't know how it's going to turn out. So I don't have very high hopes for this team. I think this could be the worst team in the East, and I could see them not being good for a while, like a few seasons. So I don't know. I have low hopes for this team. Let me know what you think in the comment section below. Like and subscribe, and I'll talk to you guys next time. Bye.